How is all this connected to the Quran? They say the desert hides many secrets, but Idris never imagined he would walk into one that breathed with the silence of the dead. What he found was not a ruin, but a graveyard of arrogance, a city swallowed not by time, but by a single scream from the heavens. The air itself carried whispers of the damned, shadows moved without wind, and every stone seemed to cry, "We were warned, and we denied." As Idris stepped deeper, he realized this was no ordinary journey. He had entered the living shadow of Surah al-Araf, where history was not written in books but carved into bones, ash, and echoes that refused to die. The night was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that pressed against the heart like unseen hands. A young traveler named Idris moved slowly through the desert path, guided only by the weak flame of his lantern. He had been walking for days, searching for water, food, and shelter. His lips were dry, his eyes red, and his feet burned with blisters. Yet, something inside him kept pulling him forward. It was not the stars, not the sand, but an invisible call, a whisper from the unseen. As dawn began to rise, Idris reached the mouth of a forgotten valley. The air shifted as he stepped inside, colder than the desert night. His heart raced, but exhaustion pushed him forward. The valley opened wide, revealing a massive city lying in ruins. Broken towers stood like skeletons, and streets stretched endlessly into the mist. Idris whispered to himself, "How can a city so vast be so silent?" He stepped carefully into the ruins. The houses were strange, carved with patterns of lions, serpents, and winged beasts. Their beauty was undeniable, but every window was dark, every door half open. Idris pushed one door, and it groaned as if it hadn't been touched for centuries. Inside, he saw plates of food lying rotten, cups shattered on the floor, and clothes thrown as though people had run away in terror. A sudden chill crawled up his spine. He felt eyes watching him. His lantern flickered. He turned quickly. No one was there. But the shadows in the corner seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if alive. The silence was broken by a faint echo, like the sound of crying. Idris followed it, his hands trembling as he held the lantern high. The sound grew louder, leading him to the city's central square. There stood a massive stone tablet, cracked but still standing tall. Words were carved into it, ancient and deep, words Idris could not fully read, but their meaning burned in his mind. We were warned. We denied. We laughed at the truth. Then came the night when the cry struck, and we became nothing. Idris staggered back, his breath quickening. Suddenly, he felt the ground vibrate beneath him. He turned to see shadows gathering at the edges of the square, shaping into figures. Men, women, and children, but their faces were twisted in silent screams. Their mouths moved, but no sound came. Idris froze as dozens of hollow eyes stared at him. One of the shadows drifted closer, and though it had no clear face, Idris felt its gaze piercing his soul. Then, in a voice that sounded like the wind dragging over stone, it whispered, "We are the people of arrogance. We denied the signs. We were given time, but we mocked the truth. Look at us now." Idris dropped his lantern, and darkness swallowed him. His heart pounded, but his feet refused to move. The shadows circled him, whispering the same words again and again. Denied, denied, denied. Suddenly, the earth cracked beneath him, releasing a foul wind that smelled of smoke and ashes. He saw flashes, men dancing in arrogance, laughing at a messenger, destroying the poor, raising idols, and mocking every reminder of God. Then a scream, louder than thunder, ripped through the city. In an instant, fire and storm consumed everything. The people's laughter turned to terror, but it was too late. Idris covered his ears, but the sound was not outside, it was inside his mind. The vision ended, and he found himself standing alone again, trembling, his lantern still burning faintly. A voice echoed from nowhere, deep and commanding. "This is the fate of those who turn away. This is the shadow of Surah Al-Araf. Will you learn, or will you follow their path?" Idris fell to his knees, tears burning his eyes. He realized he was not brought here by chance. He was chosen to witness, to carry the story, to remind others. But deep in his heart, he also felt fear, because he knew the weakness of man. The same pride that destroyed the city could destroy any nation that walked the same path. And as he prepared to leave the valley, a final whisper touched his ears, colder than death itself. The silence of the city waits for those who ignore the signs. Idris left the central square of the ruined city with shaking legs. The whispers of the shadows still echoed in his head, and every step he took felt heavier, as if unseen hands were pulling him back. His lantern burned weakly, the flame dancing in fear as if it too wanted to escape. The streets were long and twisted, lined with houses that seemed alive, their windows like hollow eyes watching his every move. He tried not to look, but the weight of their gaze pressed against him. As he turned a corner, he found a well standing in the middle of the street. The rope hung broken, and the bucket was missing. Idris leaned over the edge. At first, he saw only darkness. But then, slowly, a reflection appeared on the water deep below, his own face, pale and trembling. He blinked, but when he opened his eyes again, the reflection had changed. It was not him anymore. It was the face of a man with burning eyes and a twisted smile. The reflection spoke without lips moving. "We thought we were strong. We thought no one could touch us. We ignored the warnings of the prophets. Look at me now. This is what pride has done." The image dissolved, and the water turned black. Idris stumbled back, clutching his chest. His heart felt heavy, as if something inside him wanted to sink into that well forever. He forced himself to keep moving. As he walked, the city seemed endless. The more he tried to leave, the deeper he went. The roads curved, leading him back to the same square, the same tablet, the same whispering shadows. Panic struck him. He was trapped. He shouted, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The wind rose, swirling dust around him, and from the shadows, voices answered together, layered with sorrow and rage. "We want you to see. We want you to remember. We want you to carry our story so the living may not fall into our silence." The sound shook his bones. Idris covered his ears, but the voices pressed directly into his soul. He dropped to the ground, crying, "I am only a traveler. Why me?" The shadows whispered, softer now, "Because the world forgets. The people laugh at the signs. They follow their desires and claim to be safe. You are chosen to see, so you may warn before the cry returns." Idris felt the air grow colder. The mist around the city thickened, and through it, he saw visions again. This time, they were clearer. He saw a messenger walking through these very streets, calling people to worship only God. Some listened with trembling hearts, but most laughed. They shouted insults, threw stones, and mocked him openly. They built idols taller than houses, decorated them with jewels, and bowed before them with pride. The poor begged for mercy, but the rich crushed them under heavy taxes. The vision shifted. Idris saw the night of their end. The sky burned red, the ground shook violently, and a terrible cry came from above, a sound no human ear was meant to hear. It shattered walls, broke bones, and tore the souls from bodies. In a single breath, the entire city fell silent. Idris screamed and collapsed, pressing his forehead against the cold stone street. His tears fell fast, mixing with the dust. He whispered, "Oh God, protect me from their fate." Do not let me be among those who deny." The ground stilled, the mist slowly faded, and the shadows began to dissolve. Yet before they vanished completely, one final voice remained, close to his ear. "Remember this, traveler. Every city that mocks the truth is only a moment away from silence. Tell them, warn them, for the cry does not belong to the past, it waits for the future." Then, everything was quiet again. Idris rose weakly, his lantern glowing brighter now, as if guiding him. For the first time, he saw a narrow path leading out of the ruins. His heart still trembled, but his purpose was clear. He was no longer just a traveler, he was a witness, chosen to carry the story of those who denied the signs of Surah al-Araf. As he stepped onto the path, he looked back one last time. The city was gone, covered in mist as though it had never existed. But Idris knew the silence was real. It was not just ruins he had seen, it was a warning written in horror and sorrow, waiting for those who would repeat the same mistakes. The desert sun was rising when Idris finally left the cursed valley behind. His legs were weak, his body aching, but his heart carried a burden far heavier than his pack. Every step away from the ruins felt like a battle, as though the silence of that city still clung to him, whispering through the wind. He told himself he was free, but deep inside he knew he had been marked by what he had seen. He was no longer just Idris the traveler, he was Idris the witness. As he crossed the endless sands, he came upon a caravan of merchants resting under a cluster of date palms. They looked at him with suspicion, for his clothes were torn, his face pale, and his eyes seemed haunted. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, asked, "Where do you come from, stranger?" Idris hesitated. How could he explain the horror of the valley? He whispered, "I came from the city beyond the mountains." The merchants exchanged puzzled glances. The scarred man laughed bitterly. "There is no city there. Only cursed ground. Our fathers told us never to go near it. Many who entered never returned." Idris felt a shiver. He realized the merchants knew the legend but not the truth. Their stories had turned into superstition, their warnings into empty tales. He clenched his fists. "I have seen it," he said with trembling voice. "I walked through its streets. I heard their whispers. They were destroyed because they denied the truth." The merchants grew silent. Some looked afraid, others skeptical. One old man with a long white beard leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Tell us," he said. "What did you see?" And so Idris told them about the silent houses, the rotten food left on tables, the shadows with screaming faces, the cry that shattered their souls. His voice cracked as he spoke, but his words carried weight. The men listened, but not all believed. The scarred man scoffed. "These are just stories of fear. You were lost in the desert and dreamed of ghosts." But the old man shook his head. "No, I have heard of this before. My grandfather told me that long ago a prophet came to that city, warning them of the very things this traveler describes. They mocked him, and then the cry came. What this man says matches the stories exactly." Idris looked into the old man's eyes and felt a strange comfort. At least one person understood. Yet, as he glanced at the others, he saw disbelief, mockery, and even anger. He realized this was the same pattern that had destroyed the city. Warnings ignored, truth denied, arrogance blinding hearts. That night, as the caravan rested, Idris sat alone under the stars. He felt the weight of the shadows pressing upon him again. In the stillness he prayed, "O Lord, you have shown me what others deny. You have given me a burden I do not know how to carry. Guide me, for I am weak." As he whispered, the wind shifted, and the desert seemed to answer. A voice, deep and soft, filled his heart. "The people of arrogance walk the earth in every age. The signs are for all, but few reflect. Speak the truth, even if they laugh. Remind them, even if they turn away. For when the cry comes again, no wall, no wealth, no idol will save them. Tears rolled down Idris's face. His purpose was becoming clearer, but fear still lived in him. He was only a man, a traveler with no power. Could he really carry such a heavy message? The stars above shimmered like eyes watching him, and the wind whispered again. The burden is not yours. Your task is only to warn. Guidance belongs to the one who sees all. Idris bowed his head. For the first time, he felt strength rising in him, not from himself, but from the one who had shown him the ruins. Yet he also felt a shadow of dread, because he knew what awaited him. A world that would laugh, mock, and perhaps even try to silence him, just as the people of the lost city had done with their prophet. The night deepened, and Idris closed his eyes, the cries of the ruined city still echoing in his soul. He did not yet know where his path would lead, but he knew one thing: he could never remain silent again. The next morning, Idris woke to the noise of the caravan preparing to leave. Camels groaned, merchants shouted, and ropes were tightened. Yet Idris sat apart, staring at the horizon. His mind was not on the journey but on the voices of the ruined city that still echoed inside his chest. The scarred merchant approached him, smirking. "Stranger, do you still believe in your shadows? Last night you spoke as if you were a prophet. Careful with your tongue, people will call you mad." Idris did not answer. He only whispered, "Madness is denying what is in front of our eyes." The caravan began its march through the desert, and Idris walked among them. But soon, strange things began to happen. A sandstorm rose suddenly, dark clouds swallowing the sky though it was morning. The merchants panicked, pulling their camels close, but Idris felt a chill deeper than fear. The storm reminded him of the night the city was destroyed. As the storm raged, voices carried on the wind. The merchants shouted in terror, thinking it was only the storm's howl, but Idris knew better. He heard the same whispers from the shadows. They denied, they mocked, they laughed, and then, silence. The merchants covered their ears, but Idris dropped to his knees in the sand, shouting, "Why are you haunting me? What do you want from me now?" And from the roar of the storm, a voice thundered, "Not from you, Idris. From them. Speak, or their laughter will be their destruction." The storm died as suddenly as it had risen. The merchants stood frozen, staring at Idris. Some trembled, others scowled. The scarred man spat on the ground. "You are cursed. You bring storms with your words. Stay away from us." But the old bearded man stepped forward, placing a hand on Idris's shoulder. "No. This man carries a warning. The storm was not madness. It was a reminder." They camped again that night, but no one slept well. The merchants argued in whispers. Some wanted to drive Idris away, fearing he was a sign of bad luck. Others wanted to listen, though fear made their hearts restless. Idris sat by the fire, silent, knowing his presence was dividing them. In the dead of night, Idris walked into the desert alone. He lifted his face to the sky and prayed, "O Lord, give me strength. They call me cursed. They call me mad. But I know what I have seen. Do not let me fall into fear." The stars shimmered, and then his eyes closed as sleep overcame him. In his dream, he was back in the ruined city, but this time he was not alone. He saw a man standing tall, his face glowing with calm strength. The man's voice was gentle yet powerful. "I was sent to them. I called them to truth. They laughed, they mocked, they chased me away. But the truth does not die when denied. It waits." Their end was the cry, but their story is a warning for all who come after. Idris trembled. "Who are you?" The man's eyes burned with sorrow. "A messenger they rejected. You are chosen to carry forward what they buried under arrogance." The dream shattered with a scream. Idris woke to the merchants shouting in panic. One of their camels had collapsed, foam at its mouth, its body stiff. The scarred man pointed at Idris, his eyes filled with rage. "This is your doing. Your cursed stories. Leave us before more death follows." The old man raised his hands. "Enough. Can't you see? This is not his curse. It is a sign. You mock him as those before mocked their messenger. Do you not fear the same fate?" But the scarred man turned the others against Idris. Fear poisoned their hearts, and by dawn, they forced him away from the caravan. Alone again, Idris stood in the vast desert, watching the merchants disappear into the horizon. He felt pain in his chest, but he also felt clarity. Every rejection, every insult, every fear, they were not accidents. They were echoes of the very story he had been chosen to carry. And as the sun burned the sky, Idris whispered to himself, "If the world rejects me, I will still speak. If they call me mad, I will still warn. For silence is heavier than death, and I will not be silent." The desert stretched endlessly before Idris, a golden sea shimmering under the cruel sun. Alone now, cast away by the caravan, he walked with blistered feet and a heart heavy with both fear and determination. His throat burned with thirst, and his shadow stretched long across the sand. Yet even as his body weakened, the whispers of the ruined city kept him moving forward. By evening, Idris reached a small village at the edge of an oasis. Children played near the water, women carried jars, and men sat in groups, laughing loudly. The sound of life struck Idris like a memory of another world. For a moment, he thought he was safe. For a moment, he thought maybe the horror had been left behind. But when he entered the village, carrying the weight of his haunted eyes, the laughter quieted. People looked at him with unease. His clothes were torn, his face burned by the desert, and his eyes seemed older than his years. A man stepped forward, asking, "Who are you, stranger?" Idris spoke softly. "A traveler, a witness. I have seen what arrogance can do to a people." Curiosity drew the villagers closer. They gathered around him, eager for tales, for stories to fill their night. Idris sat near the well and began to speak. He told them of the valley, of the silent city, of the shadows that whispered and the cry that shattered. He spoke of prophets mocked and warnings ignored. The villagers listened, some with wide eyes, others with smirks. When Idris finished, silence hung heavy. Then one man laughed. "Old tales to scare children. Do you expect us to believe that cities vanish overnight?" Another added mockingly, "Perhaps the heat has cooked your brain, stranger. Shadows whispering, cries from the sky. These are dreams, not truths." The crowd erupted in laughter, but not all were laughing. Among them was a boy, no older than 12, his face pale with fear. He tugged at his mother's dress and whispered, "Mother, what if he speaks the truth? What if it happens to us?" The mother hushed him quickly, pulling him away. "Do not speak such things," she warned. Idris's heart ached. The pattern was repeating. Mockery, denial, fear buried under laughter. He raised his voice. "I swear by the one who gives life and takes it, what I saw was no dream. Do not turn away. Do not make the same mistake they made, or your laughter will turn to silence." The villagers grew uneasy. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with anger. A man shouted, "Leave us, wanderer. We do not need your cursed words." Idris lowered his head. He felt the same rejection again, sharp as a blade. He stood and walked out of the village, his heart breaking but his resolve firm. Yet as he stepped into the night, something strange happened. The laughter of the villagers behind him twisted, warped, and became screams. Idris turned sharply. The village lay in darkness, though the moon still shone above. Shadows stretched unnaturally, crawling up the walls, wrapping around houses. The laughter was gone, replaced by cries of terror. Idris froze, watching as the very same horror he had seen in the ruined city began to touch this place. A woman screamed, clutching her child. Men stumbled as the ground shook. The water in the well turned black, reflecting not the stars but hollow, twisted faces. Idris shouted, "Repent! Return before it is too late." But the cries grew louder. Then silence fell. Absolute silence. Idris stood trembling. The village was still there, the houses, the well, the palm trees, but not a single voice remained. The people were gone, as if swallowed by the earth. Only the echo of their laughter remained in the air, faint and mocking. Idris fell to his knees. His tears soaked the sand as he whispered, "O Lord, why show me this again? Why must I see the silence again and again?" And in the stillness, a voice answered inside his heart, "Because they repeat the same path. And you must repeat the warning. Until the end of time, arrogance will walk the earth, and the cry will wait for those who deny." Idris bowed his head. He was no longer only a witness of the past, he was now a witness of the present. And somewhere deep inside, he knew, this was only the beginning. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed was far more terrifying. The village lay broken, shadows crawling across the ruins like unseen hands. Children clung to their mothers, their cries echoing the haunting reminder that what had just occurred was not an ordinary disaster, it was a warning. Aram stood in the center, his heart heavy, as he recalled the verse of Surah Al-Araf. "So we seize them for their sins, and we cause them to sink into the earth." His voice trembled as he repeated it aloud, and the villagers felt its weight crushing their souls. Among the ruins, strange things began to happen. Doors creaked without wind. Whispers traveled through the walls though no one was inside. The old well, once a source of life, now bubbled with a foul stench. People said they saw hands reaching up from the water, pale and trembling, as if those who once mocked faith were trying to claw their way back to the living. Fear spread like wildfire, but so did arrogance. Some among them still laughed, calling it superstition. That night, a child went missing. His mother screamed until her voice gave out, and the villagers gathered with torches to search the darkness. They found him at the edge of the forest, standing still, eyes wide open, staring at something no one else could see. When they called his name, he did not answer. When they touched his shoulder, his lips finally moved, whispering, "They're here, the ones who were swallowed." His tiny hand pointed toward the valley, where faint cries drifted in the wind like the mourning of the damned. The spiritual leader of the village wept openly, reminding them that arrogance blinds the heart, and that Surah Al-Araf warned of people who hear but do not listen, who see but do not understand. "We are walking their path," he cried. But his words were drowned by laughter of a few men who mocked him, saying, "Fear keeps you alive, old man. We choose freedom." Yet freedom without guidance was only a chain dragging them closer to destruction. That night, the earth trembled again. From beneath the ground came hollow knocks, as if something trapped below was trying to escape. Walls cracked. The air grew heavy, choking those who dared to stay outside. People ran to their homes, clutching their children, praying desperately. But prayers without sincerity were like whispers into the void. Only a few bowed their heads with true submission, their tears carving paths of light into the darkness. And then, it came, the shadow of despair itself. A figure rose from the valley, tall and formless, its presence so suffocating that even the torches dimmed. No one could see its face, but all could feel its rage, its hunger. It carried with it the voices of those long destroyed, the echoes of past nations who denied the truth. It roared, and the villagers fell to their knees, some in worship, some in terror, some in stubborn defiance. Aram stood with shaking hands, clutching the Quran to his chest. He whispered the verses of Surah Al-Araf, and with every word, the air shifted, the shadows recoiled. His voice grew louder, rising above the storm of whispers. The figure wailed, retreating back into the valley, but not before leaving one final warning. Its cry echoed into every heart, "Those who deny will never rest." The village was left trembling, the people divided. Some hearts softened, turning toward light. Others grew colder, consumed by denial. But all of them knew one truth: this was only the beginning. The night had fallen over the city like a suffocating blanket. The streets were no longer filled with the hum of life, but instead echoed with whispers that seemed to creep from the cracks of forgotten walls. Aisha stood by the window of the abandoned mansion where she and Zion had taken shelter. Her heart was heavy with questions. Why did the shadows feel thicker tonight, and why did her soul tremble as if it already knew the answer? Zion lit a small lantern, its trembling flame casting long, eerie silhouettes across the room. He opened the worn copy of the Quran he always carried, and his voice, low and trembling, recited the verses of Surah Al-Araf. The words seemed to clash with the darkness, as if unseen creatures writhed in agony at the sound. Aisha closed her eyes, clinging to every syllable. In the sacred rhythm, there was strength, a reminder that their fear was not meaningless, that light existed beyond the suffocating gloom. But as the final word left Zion's lips, a sudden gust blew through the cracked window, extinguishing the lantern. The room was devoured by blackness. A soft scratching sound rose from the walls, as though claws dragged themselves across ancient wood. Aisha reached instinctively for Zion's hand, and when she touched his skin, she realized his fingers were ice cold, trembling not from fear but from something deeper, an awareness. "The trial is not over," he whispered, his voice unsteady. "The people of old denied the truth. They mocked the messengers, and when the punishment descended, they cried for mercy, but it was too late. Aisha, we are standing in the same place as they once stood. Our choices are being weighed." Before she could respond, the ground beneath them shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a chilling wail, like 1,000 souls mourning, filled the air. The mansion groaned as though alive. Aisha pressed herself against Zion, her tears burning her cheeks. Fear clawed at her chest, but amidst the terror, her heart ached with something else: love. In Zion's presence, she felt both fragile and unbreakable, as though his faith was the shield that held back the storm of unseen horrors. The shadows thickened, gathering at the edges of the room. They formed vague shapes, distorted figures of men and women with hollow eyes, faces twisted in regret. They moved closer, whispering words Aisha could barely comprehend. "We had the chance. We denied. We are lost." Their lament echoed like thunder in her mind. Zion raised his trembling hand, clutching the Quran tightly to his chest. His voice rose again, louder this time, with verses from Surah Al-Araf. The shadows shrieked, pulling back as if the words burned them, writhing in silent agony before dispersing into smoke. Yet, the air remained heavy, as though the trial was far from over. Aisha collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by both terror and relief. She looked up at Zion, her lips trembling. "If faith is our shield," she whispered, "then promise me you will not let go of it. Not even if it costs us our lives." Zion looked at her with eyes burning with determination. He knelt beside her, pressing his forehead against hers, and for a fleeting moment, love silenced the cries of the unseen. "I promise," he breathed, "because without faith, there is no life. And without you, Aisha, there is no reason to fight. The mansion's silence returned, but they both knew it was the silence before a greater storm. Somewhere beyond the walls, a low, guttural growl reverberated, as though the very darkness itself had taken form, and it was waiting for them. The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with the weight of judgment, as Layla stood in the center, her voice trembling yet unwavering, reciting words of justice and truth. Around her, men of power who had long manipulated the weak now found themselves cornered, their corruption laid bare for all to see. She spoke not for herself but for those silenced by oppression, echoing the timeless reminder that every soul will be accounted for, every secret laid open on the day when no power, no wealth, and no false testimony could save them. The crowd listened, some with awe, others with fear, for her words carried the authority of something greater than human will. The villains who once mocked her resolve were now trembling, their arrogance stripped away, leaving behind only their guilt. Yet the true climax was not in their downfall, but in Layla's own surrender to the divine justice she had carried in her heart. She understood that her strength was never hers alone. It flowed from the eternal source of guidance, the one who commands justice, mercy, and accountability. As night fell, the city that once drowned in shadows began to glow with a new light of hope. The people were no longer afraid to stand for what was right, inspired by Layla's courage and the revelation that justice was not an idea but a living truth, unshaken by